Okay, so it's time to take the world's most wanted bait finesse reel, KastKing ZEPHYR, out to do its casting video. But before we do that, I want to go over something that I don't think I covered, at least verbally, in the unboxing video, and that's the price of the ZEPHYR. Now, right now, there are only two places that I know of that you can get the ZEPHYR, and the first place is Amazon, which is where I bought it from. And the price of the ZEPHYR on Amazon was, I believe, $69 plus tax and free shipping. Now, and not surprisingly, they've all sold out on Amazon, and I don't know when they're going to be restocked, but you may want to email KastKing about that. Now, the second place you can get the ZEPHYR, and not surprisingly, it's going to be on AliExpress. And the price there is a lot cheaper at about $55 or $56. But I do see a couple of problems there, or at least potential problems. Now, the first problem is, for some reason, and I don't know why, but the KastKing store on AliExpress does not take PayPal as a form of payment. And I learned the hard way about a year ago when I, made a purchase on AliExpress with my credit card. It wound up getting hacked, and yeah. And the second issue is that I don't know if KastKing USA will help you with any issues for reels that you bought on AliExpress. I don't know if that's a whole separate entity or if they're the same, but so yeah, there's really only two places to buy the ZEPHYR right now, which is going to be AliExpress or Amazon. So as I stated in the previous video, we're not just going to take the ZEPHYR out and do a normal casting impressions video. We're going to do a casting impressions video against the former most wanted bait finesse reel in the world. That's the Fishband GH100. Now, about a year and a half ago, the GH100 was in the exact same position as the ZEPHYR is today, where the demand for the reel greatly exceeded what was available. Now, these reels have very, very similar specs. They're both made of carbon. They're both super lightweight at about 5.6 ounces. They both have short spool shaft spools. But I did an analysis of both reels, and I'm going to go over the advantages each reel is going to have over the other before we take to the water. Now, we're going to start off with the ZEPHYR. Now, with the ZEPHYR, I counted 3 advantages that this reel is going to have over the GH100, and the main one is going to be the spool and the fact that it is significantly lighter than the spool of the GH100. The spool weight is 7.6 grams for the ZEPHYR and about 8.4 for the GH100, so that's very significant when it comes to bait finesse. Now, the second advantage is that the ZEPHYR, and I didn't mention this in the unboxing video, and I should have, but it has a cone-shaped tapered line guide to reduce the friction angle during the cast. And then the third advantage is that line guide is actually poked out farther on the ZEPHYR than it is on the GH100. So 3 advantages for the ZEPHYR when I studied both of these reels. Okay, so on to the GH100, and this reel really only has one advantage, and that is the brake system. Now, the brake system on the GH100, and it's what makes this reel, pretty revolutionary, is the fact that it copies Shimano's finesse tuned brake system. And in a nutshell, basically this is a dynamic magnetic system where the distance between the magnets and the spool change during the cast. And I'll go more into that in a future video for a different reel. But yeah, there we go. So I'm gonna spool these reels up with the same amount of line, stick them on the exact same rod, and let's see what happens. Okay guys, so I'm out here on the water, and of course we have the latest and greatest budget BFS reel, the KastKing ZEPHYR. And then we also have my personal favorite, Fishband GH100. They are mounted on the exact same rod, the Major Craft Corza 6'5" ultralight. Now this rod is not the best casting BFS rod, as it's a bass rod and a JDM bass rod at that, so it's pretty stiff. So it's going to be a good test of the spool and braking capabilities of these reels. Now they both have 4-pound P-line fluoro clear, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to stand on this slab right here in the exact same spot, and I'm going to cast into this corner several different BFS weight lures from, you know, light to heavy. And hopefully, because of that metal structure there as being a reference point, we'll get to see, you know, kind of see where the distances are between these two reels for each lure. So that's how it's going to work. And, you know, maybe I'll get lucky and catch a bass or a crappie or something out here while I'm doing this. Okay, so we're of course going to start off with the ZEPHYR, and we're going to start off with a relatively lightweight BFS lure. It's a crappie magnet with a 1/32 ounce jig head that weighs roughly about 2 grams with this snap swivel. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to cast until I find the optimal brake setting where I can make consistent casts without blowing the spool up, and then I'll show you guys what the results are. Okay, so I set the ZEPHYR up with the brake setting that I found the best for my casting style, and that means the external dial is right about there. So it's about 3 clicks out from the maximum position, which is, you know, not very far, but that's pretty typical of these MagTrack style static systems. But let me show you what the ZEPHYR can do. So right there, I probably hit at least 20 yards, maybe 21. Now, with this rod being so stiff, it does pull the lure off to the left, but I can easily compensate by releasing the lure a little early. But yeah, with this brake setting, I can cast pretty much almost as hard as I want and not worry about an overrun. Ooh, had a little bit of overrun there, but the distance was probably the farthest cast yet. But hopefully you guys can see where this little crappie magnet is landing. Let's do a few more casts. So I'd estimate that to be at least 20 yards. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but the ZEPHYR does have this little, I guess this little screeching noise when I crank the handle. Sounds like maybe a bearing needs some oil. So yeah, for 2 grams with this super stiff JDM bass rod, I find that to be very acceptable. Let's do some overhead. Let's see if it'll take overhead cast. Yep, handles overhead very well. Of course, the accuracy is a lot better with overhead. All right, so far so good for the KastKing ZEPHYR. Now, if I mounted this reel on, let's say, my Ace Hawk CU double with the ultralight tip, I think that this little lure will probably reach the edge of that metal structure there. But seeing as we're on this Corza, I am pretty satisfied with the results of casting this pretty ultralight lure. All right, let's get to the GH100. Okay guys, so up next of course is the GH100, throwing the crappie magnet. Now, just in case I didn't tell you guys earlier, both of these reels are set to where the spool tension is tightened up to just minimize the side-to-side play. Now with the GH100, I was actually able to back the brakes down to right around the 1.25 setting on the brake dial. So not even 1.5. And in case you didn't know, the numbers on the GH100's brake dial go from 0 to 5. So I was actually able to back these brakes down to more than halfway. And you definitely could not do that on the ZEPHYR. And let me show you what the GH100 can do. Okay, that went off to the left. So right there, it is definitely matching the ZEPHYR's distance. And I know it's hard to explain, but you can definitely feel the dynamic brakes working a little bit on this GH100. Meaning that while the brakes are strong, on the tail end of the cast, you don't feel that parachute effect as much as you do on the ZEPHYR or, you know, any kind of static brake reels. Let's do a few more casts. So that's going out there at least 20 yards or 60 feet. Let's do an overhead. So yeah, GH100 showing me exactly why this is still my favorite Chinese BFS reel, at least for now. All right, let's switch up the lures. Okay, so up next is going to be my personal favorite lure for trout. So therefore it's a very important lure to test. That is the Lucky Craft Pointer 48 suspending jerkbait. Now this lure weighs about 2.3 grams. So with the snap swivel, you're looking at probably 2.5 grams. So right at around 3/32 of an ounce. And of course we're doing the ZEPHYR. And the best brake setting for the ZEPHYR for this particular lure is the exact same as the crappie magnet, which is 3 clicks out from maximum. And that's something that I find pretty consistent with static magnetic brakes. And let's see what it can do. All right, so that is going out there at least 20 yards, probably the same as the crappie magnet. Now the lure does not have a weight transfer system, so it is paramount that I get a good cast, a good clean cast, so it doesn't helicopter. But yeah, that is definitely a good distance for this lure, especially if you're targeting, you know, trout in creeks and rivers like a lot of you guys have up north. You're so lucky. And the accuracy is a lot easier with this lure as well. As you can see, it's not pulling off to the left. It's overhead cast. All right, let's do a few more casts and we'll switch over to the GH100. All right, a couple more casts. Now I do feel a slight wind coming in. Probably doesn't show up on the camera, but this could cause problems. Let's see what happens. All right, no problems there. Yeah, this is definitely a more than adequate distance for this 2.5 gram lure. Yeah, that's probably going close to 70 feet right there. Once again, I can hear this squeaking coming from the ZEPHYR. when I retrieve this lure in, I think one of the bearings probably definitely needs some oil. It's probably the best cast yet, but it's definitely not affecting the casting performance. All right, very impressive from the ZEPHYR. Okay guys, GH100's turn with the pointer 48, and I was actually able to go down 2 clicks on the brake dial successfully, so it's now set at 1. And let me show you what it can do. All right, so right there, that particular cast was actually looked to be farther than any cast that the ZEPHYR could do. Let's do a few more casts. Yep, it's definitely a few feet farther, maybe 2 or 3 feet farther than the best I could get out of the ZEPHYR. Now I actually had to stop that cast because I thought I was going to hit that metal structure there. Let's do a few more. So apparently, because of the dynamic brake system the GH100 has, I'm able to back the brakes down a couple of clicks to get a little bit more distance. And I still have plenty of control. And I might be able, you know, on a windy day, the wind in my back, I could probably bring the brakes down maybe 1 or 2 more clicks. Let's do an overhead cast. So yeah, right there, it looks like for this particular lure, the 2.5 gram lure, the GH100 definitely has the advantage visually. But if you guys think that the ZEPHYR was casting this lure farther, then let me know in the comments. Yep, I'm definitely getting at least a couple of feet further on this GH100. Okay guys, so the last lure we're going to test is also going to be the heaviest. It's this live target DAIWA jerkbait. Now with the snap swivel, you're probably looking at close to 4 grams total. So this is a heavy lure in my opinion for bait finesse. Now with the KastKing ZEPHYR, I was actually able to back the brakes off 1 click from the other lures, and let me show you what it can do. Now since this lure is so heavy, I can do an overhead cast with 2 hands pretty easily, and I'll say that cast probably went over 70 feet. All right, let's do a few more. Hopefully you guys can see that. Let's do one more overhead. Yeah, that's the farthest cast so far. It's going out there well over 75 foot, probably over 80 feet. Let's do some sidearm. Now I don't think this lure has a weight transfer system, but it casts pretty good. All right, a couple more sidearm. So as expected, handles this almost 4 gram total weight very easy. One more overhead. Oop, had an overrun that sorted itself out. But yeah, just by judging that distance, I'm saying it's probably close to hitting almost 30 yards. Almost. Okay, one more cast for the road. Okay, so I'm going to try to remember visually where those casts were landing, and let's switch up to the GH100 now. Okay, so it's the GH100's turn with the live target dace, and I was actually able to back the brakes down to the #1 setting. So a couple of clicks lower than before, and let me show you what the GH100 can do. All right, so right there, it looks to be already equaling the ZEPHYR in distance. And these are with overhead casts. All right, right there, you're probably looking at maybe almost 2 feet longer on that cast than the previous cast. Now it does help that I'm able to do a two-handed overhead cast with this lure. So yeah, I'm thinking this probably doesn't sound like a lot, but maybe outcast the ZEPHYR with this lure by maybe like a foot, maybe almost 2 feet depending on the cast. Yeah, it's consistently going out there, probably close to 90 feet. All right, let's do some sidearm. All right, I stopped that cast short because I thought I was going to hit that metal structure. Sidearm is going out there almost as far as overhead. All right, a couple more casts. Shit, I thought I was going to hit the metal structure. So yeah, both of these lures, as expected, easily handle heavier upper end bait finesse weights with little to no effort. All right, so let's go home and let's talk about the results and other things that I observed between these two reels. Okay guys, so back from the water, and let's go over my thoughts and observations after casting both of these reels side by side. Now let's talk about the tiniest lure first and the lightest. That is the 2 gram crappie magnet. Now with this particular lure, I felt both of these reels were probably getting equal distance, somewhere a little bit over 60 foot per cast. But when it came to ease of casting, the advantage definitely went to the ZEPHYR, as I felt that it was slightly easier to cast this lure straight and be accurate without having to adjust my release point. And I feel that if you actually are going to go even lighter than this, the advantage for the ZEPHYR is going to grow over the GH100 because of its much lighter spool. Now the next lure is going to be the Lucky Craft Pointer 48, 2.3 grams. And I feel that both of these reels handle this lure pretty equally, probably hitting over 65 foot per cast sometimes. But I think on some of the casts, the GH100 probably hit a couple of foot more, just from my observations. Okay, so on to the last and heaviest lure, the live target dace. And both of these reels were probably hitting, in excess of 80 foot per cast. But I feel that the GH100 visually was hitting longer casts, not by much, maybe a foot or two over the ZEPHYR more consistently. Now the casting performance pretty much went exactly as I thought it would, but full disclosure, the GH100 does have an unfair advantage, and that's because I cleaned the spool bearings on the GH100 way back when I did the cast battle against the Surinoi Spirit Fox, and I also added a couple of drops of Hedgehog Alchemy oil. Now I did inspect the spool bearings on the ZEPHYR, and they are very clean, but I suspect that the performance on this reel could go up a little bit if I did clean them out and put some high quality oil in the bearings. So let's talk about the braking systems next. Now I am very happy to say that the brakes are very strong on the ZEPHYR, so they do the job just fine, but the brakes on the GH100 are definitely better. They are more forgiving on the limit, and when I did get a backlash or overrun on either reel, it wasn't as severe on the GH100 as it was on the ZEPHYR. And as you can see, I was really able to crank these brakes down way past the middle setting, so that gives me plenty of braking power to spare. Now with the ZEPHYR, I really couldn't go past this first setting right here, or this first number, which I believe is 5 in Roman numerals. Now that is pretty typical of static mag track style brakes. Now let's talk about the palming and ergonomics next. Now both of these reels are very comfortable to palm. They don't have any kind of sharp edges or protrusions that dig into my hand, but the ZEPHYR definitely feels like it's lower profile. And I think that's because if you compare them side by side, they're actually very even when it comes to height. But as you can see with the ZEPHYR, the front slopes down, while the GH100 it just goes straight across. So it definitely gives the ZEPHYR a feeling of being a lower profile reel. Of course, both of these reels are about the same weight, so they're very light. But yeah, the paint job on the ZEPHYR feels better as well in my hand. So the next thing we're going to talk about is pretty important for bait finesse reels, and that's going to be the spool to frame tolerance. And more importantly, did any line get between the spool and the frame during my casting? And the answer is yes for both. Now with the ZEPHYR, this little brown piece here definitely worked, because there were no times the line got between the spool and the frame on the palm side plate. When it did go through, it was on the crank side plate, which is kind of funny. Now on the GH100, it was the opposite. When the line did go through, it was on the palm side plate, but sometimes it was more of a hassle because, as you can see, this GH100 has this braking mechanism right here, and sometimes the line would wrap around this and you'd have to take more time to pick it out. But both reels have pretty acceptable spool to frame tolerances in my opinion. I've had more expensive JDM reels that had worse tolerances than both of these reels. So what are my thoughts on the ZEPHYR now that I finally got it and casted it side by side against my personal favorite GH100? Now, after watching all of Roar Fishing's videos on the ZEPHYR, I knew that it wasn't bringing anything groundbreaking or new to the table as far as bait finesse goes, like having, some ridiculously lightweight spool or some kind of, sophisticated braking system. But what the ZEPHYR does do is that it easily matches the casting performance of all the top AliExpress BFS reels like the PW100, the Spirit Fox, and of course the GH100, but it does so in a much better looking package. I mean, there's not a bad angle on this reel. And in fact, I think the only reel that looks better than the ZEPHYR as far as AliExpress BFS reels, it's going to be that multicolored rainbow reel, the Black Knight. But of course, that's personal preference. Now, what that also means is that the ZEPHYR is going to easily match or beat all but the most expensive lightest spooled JDM reels, but do it at a much lower price point. Now, speaking of JDM reels, I want to bring up an important point here. Now, the KastKing ZEPHYR was never designed to steal sales away from, you know, your $300+ Shimano ALDEBARAN or your $300+ DAIWA Alphas Air, because anyone who has the money to buy those reels is not going to say, hey, I think I want the ZEPHYR instead. Now, what the ZEPHYR does do, it allows people who don't have $300+ to spend on a BFS reel the ability to get into bait finesse very affordably and have great performing equipment. Now, another thing that the ZEPHYR can do, and it's not just, you know, limited to the ZEPHYR, it can apply to all these other reels as well, is that it can definitely complement your expensive BFS reels in the fact that you can get one of these budget AliExpress reels and keep it stored in the trunk of your car, the back seat, or wherever, and you really don't care if this thing gets banged up or scratched up because they are so affordable. So to wrap this video up, let's talk about the future plans for BFS from KastKing. Now, according to Roar Fishing, they had planned to release a total of 3 new bait finesse reels, and one of them is supposed to be a higher end, more expensive model. Now, if you go on AliExpress and check out the official KastKing store, you'll see that they actually have 3 bait finesse reels already. Of course, you got your ZEPHYR, and then you have the slightly cheaper Mega Jaws, which has a bait finesse model, and then you have a more expensive reel called the Valiant Eagle, and as you can see, it's got this nice shiny chrome finish. Now, I'm not sure if the Valiant Eagle is supposed to be the high-end model that Roar Fishing was talking about, because while it is more expensive, the specs on that reel as far as spool weight, etc., is actually lower than the ZEPHYR, which is very confusing for a reel that's supposed to be higher end. So if they are coming out with an even higher end reel, maybe one that's made of aluminum, you know, maybe one that's got, you know, the Shimano FTB style braking system, but, you know, made it up to a much lighter spool, and maybe even a drag clicker, which is something that a lot of people like in bait finesse reels, I would definitely buy that reel if they came out with it. So that's pretty much it for the KastKing ZEPHYR. I have a whole bunch of bait finesse content coming up as I've gotten several JDM reels to unbox, and 2 of them being bait finesse, but I do plan on taking the ZEPHYR out to the field and doing some cast measurements against other bait finesse reels in the future. But until then, thanks a lot.